And moving on to West Africa now, the junta-led Burkina Faso has refused to accept deportees from the United States in a snub to one of President Donald Trump's signature migration policies.
Tonight, a diplomatic rupture that is as symbolic as it is consequential. Burkina Faso, a West African nation that has captured global headlines for its politics and its pivoting alliances, has made a bold declaration. It will not accept deportees from the United States. A single sentence from the foreign ministry rippled outward. Burkina Faso is not a land of deportation. The rejection marks a rare refusal to cooperate with a U.S. program that has startled human rights groups and shaken diplomatic ties across the continent. What does this mean for the people caught in the middle, for Washington's immigration strategy, and for the changing calculus of power between the global North and the global South? Tonight we follow the story from Ouagadougou to Washington and into communities where lives are affected by unfolding diplomatic standoff. On national television, Burkina Faso's foreign minister addressed the nation. The proposition from the United States to accept non-citizens deported from U.S. territory was, he said, indecent and incompatible with the country's sense of dignity. He invoked national values and the vision of the country's current leader in framing that rejection. Within hours of that statement, Washington altered its own posture. The U.S. Embassy in Ouagadougou announced a pause on most visa services for Burkina applicants, redirecting appointments to neighboring capitals. The move, presented by some observers as a diplomatic response, sharpened a dispute already heavy with political overtones. The U.S. program at the center of this dispute involves agreements, some public, some reportedly secret, to deport certain non-citizens to third countries, including African states. Human rights organizations have raised alarms over the secrecy of some arrangements, the conditions of return, and reported incentives offered to participating states. Some African governments, for a mix of economic, diplomatic, or political reasons, have engaged with Washington. Others have declined, citing concern about human rights, national dignity, or simply the optics of appearing to be a destination for deportations. Burkina Faso's blunt refusal places it in the latter camp and crystallizes a broader debate across the continent about autonomy and leverage in the face of external pressure. Across West Africa and beyond, governments weigh three competing pressures: the need for international partnerships and aid, domestic political legitimacy before voters and security forces, and the moral and legal obligations a state has to people on its soil. When a foreign power offers cash, support, or deals tied to migration management, the calculus becomes fraught. But at the heart of the political headlines are human lives, the men and women who move between borders, who are detained, released, or returned, and whose futures hang on diplomatic decisions they neither made nor control. Deportation is not a policy statistic. It is a rupture. Families separated, jobs lost, communities disrupted. We spoke with immigration lawyers, activists, and family members who say the real tragedy lies in the secrecy and haste that often accompany these removals. Reports from the region detail cases of detained migrants whose fate was decided without legal transparency or adequate consular notification. Those concerns sharpen when removals are negotiated with third countries rather than the migrants' own homelands. Imagine a parent waiting at an airport for a child who never arrives. Imagine a village learning that one of its own was returned without warning. These are not abstractions. They are living, painful realities that shape public sentiment and, ultimately, state policy. The diplomatic implications are immediate and material. The suspension of visa services is a tangible pressure tactic, one that directly affects students, business people, and families seeking to travel for work, study, medical care, or reunification. In Ouagadougou, that message was received as punitive. In Washington, It read as a calibrated move to encourage compliance. This standoff also unfolds against a backdrop of shifting alliances. Burkina Faso's military-led government has sought new partners in recent years, and ties with Western capitals have become complicated. The rejection of the deportation proposal is therefore not only about migrants, it's about sovereignty, identity, and the political signals a government sends to both domestic constituencies and international partners. The ripple effects cross borders. West African states are acutely aware of precedent. If one country accepts deportees from a major power, others may feel pressure to follow, or to resist. These decisions are discussed in regional fora, among Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS leaders, and in diplomatic back channels. At the same time, some countries have chosen cooperation with Washington, seeing benefits in strengthening ties or receiving development assistance. Others, like Burkina Faso, calculate the political and moral cost to be too high, particularly given a domestic audience attuned to national dignity and recent history of foreign interference. Why did Burkina Faso say no? The official explanation speaks to dignity and principle. The foreign minister framed the proposal as inconsistent with the nation's values and the vision of its leadership. Politically, the junta in Ouagadougou has been consolidating power and asserting sovereignty, a posture that makes public compliance with a controversial external policy unlikely. Beyond politics, there's a legal and humanitarian argument. Accepting deportees who are not citizens raises complex questions about identity verification, protection of rights, and the ability of receiving states to ensure due process. For a country with limited administrative capacity and ongoing security challenges, taking on a sudden influx of third-country nationals could be destabilizing. Put simply, the decision to refuse may reflect a calculation that the risks, social, political, and humanitarian, outweigh any potential financial or diplomatic incentives. The U.S. approach to migration has hardened in recent years, and debates in Washington about enforcement, border security, and costs continue to inflame politics. The strategy of seeking third-country acceptances is intended to create options for rapid returns, but it has also sparked controversy for its secrecy and for reports of financial sweeteners offered to partner countries. Human rights organizations have criticized aspects of the program, arguing for greater transparency and safeguards. When a nation like Burkina Faso pushes back, it complicates that strategy, forcing Washington to decide whether to use diplomatic pressure, offer new incentives, or adjust tactics entirely. The suspension of visa services is one lever, but the broader cost to long-term relations and soft power may be far higher. Public opinion matters. In Burkina Faso, citizens are watching how their leaders respond to foreign pressure. In neighboring capitals, leaders are taking note. Across the African diaspora, social media amplifies outrage or solidarity, shaping how governments perceive the domestic political cost of cooperation. For leaders who came to power promising sovereignty and dignity, a public refusal to be a recipient of deportations can be a powerful symbol. It signals to voters, to soldiers, and to other states that the nation is not for sale. That symbolism often matters as much as the immediate diplomatic benefit. International law and humanitarian norms frame a large portion of the debate. Deportations, particularly when they involve third countries, raise questions about non-refoulement, proper identification, and the rights of asylum seekers. Civil society organizations warn that rush removals can lead to rights violations and leave vulnerable people stranded. Critics say the U.S. program's opacity prevents independent monitoring and accountability. For countries like Burkina Faso, which has been grappling with internal displacement and security threats, adding the burden of adjudicating the status of deported persons could further strain fragile systems. Those legal and capacity concerns were a recurring theme in the government's public justification for refusal. This episode also sits inside a larger geopolitical shift. Across West Africa and the Sahel, governments have been recalibrating alliances, some turning toward new partners, others reasserting old bonds. The rejection of a U.S. deportation request is both a stand on migration policy and a hint at deeper realignment, an insistence on sovereignty in the face of traditional power. In the months and years ahead, this posture could influence trade, security cooperation, and diplomatic engagement. Whether other states follow Burkina Faso's lead, or whether Washington recalibrates its approach, will shape the nature of Africa-U.S. relations for the next decade. For migrants themselves, the stakes are painfully immediate. Some will remain in limbo, awaiting decisions. Others may be returned to countries where they have no ties, exposing them to the risk of detention, statelessness, or worse. Advocates urge a humane, rights-based approach, clear channels for regularization, fair hearings for asylum seekers, and transparency in any removal process. They warn that securitized, opaque programs, even if politically expedient, can produce long-term harm to people and to the international reputation of the governments involved. What happens next? There are several plausible paths. 1. Washington offers new incentives or legal guarantees, stronger oversight, third-party monitoring, or development aid, and a compromise is reached. 2. Diplomatic pressure escalates, including extended visa suspensions or restrictions, producing retaliatory steps that fray ties further. 3. African states collectively push for a regional or multilateral approach to migration that reduces the burden on single nations and creates standardized safeguards. Each scenario carries costs and trade-offs. The choice will reflect not merely policy, but politics, domestic priorities, and international posture. Voices from the ground remind us that policy decisions are not abstract. A human rights lawyer warns about the dangers of clandestine deals. A teacher in Ouagadougou praises the government's stance as a defense of dignity. A parent worries about family members abroad who now face renewed uncertainty. These voices form the mosaic of reaction, uneasy, proud, fearful, resolute. They are the public face of a nation asserting itself at a fraught geopolitical moment. History matters. The memory of colonialism, the long arc of intervention, and more recent patterns of unequal partnership inform how African states evaluate requests from global powers. Refusal is not always defiance for its own sake. Sometimes it is a long memory acting as prudence. In that sense, Burkina Faso's decision is a modern page in a much older book. It is the assertion that sovereignty and dignity must be more than words on ceremonial occasions. They must shape policy. What began as a policy about deportations has opened a broader conversation about power, dignity, and the rules that govern a world in flux. Burkina Faso's rejection of the U.S. proposal is a reminder that diplomacy is never only the business of capitals, it is the business of people, memory, and the shifting calculus of global influence. In a world of fast headlines and rapid policy moves, this moment asks a simple question: whose voice decides what happens to the most vulnerable? Tonight, Burkina Faso answered, for now. The response from Washington and from other capitals will tell us much about the balance of power in the years ahead.